we'll roll right into our talk today. And I want to thank everyone for being here today. We have the great pleasure of welcoming Colonel English, who is Henrico's relatively new chief of police. Colonel English holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Richmond and a master's degree from Virginia Commonwealth University. And so I just want to say thank you to Colonel English for being here today, and welcome.
Well, thank you all. I appreciate the invite, and I know John Jay, you thumbs up on the VCU part of that, but you know U of R is my home.
You hear what I said earlier, then you weren't listening.
Huh? I did not hear that part.
Okay, I told him it was great that he finally got that team off the bench and let him use and win the game for him. And
oh my goodness! Oh, I totally concur with you on that one.
All right, we'll talk later.
All right. I will say, Yvonne, before I get started, I will say I saw what Peter has, those peanuts, and I tell you, those things are addictive. But again, I will just say to you all, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all today. And I know Yvonne sent a few questions regarding the talk today. And I just want to just kind of give you a little bit of rundown of myself, what my vision is for Henrico. And I just feel really, really blessed to be back home and be able to lead an agency such as the Henrico Police Division. So with that said, as you all know, I was I was with Richmond Police Department for 28 years, 10 months, and 23 days. And I retired from there in 2018. So I worked my way up through the ranks in that department, was a deputy chief there for 7.5 years before I assumed the role of police chief in Harrisonburg, Virginia. And so I went to Harrisonburg for 2 years. I was sworn in there on September the 10th, 2018, and left there on September the 10th, 2020. So a great experience going to the Valley, a different part of the state, totally different type of police department, totally different community and where I came from Richmond. And so it gave me some much valued experience, and then the opportunity presents itself here in Henrico. And I was able to come back home in Henrico, which I've lived here since 1989, really. When I got out of college, I've always been a resident of Henrico County. So it was a blessing to be able to come back home and lead a division here in Henrico. Now, again, I am not from Richmond. I was not born and raised here. I'm originally from North Carolina, actually a small town in North Carolina called Eflin, which is, I always get the question, well, where is that? It's near Durham and Chapel Hill area. So I am very familiar with the basketball hotbeds there of Duke and Carolina. But that's where I came from. And when I went to school here at the University of Richmond and played basketball there, after I graduated, I just ended up staying in Richmond and never going back to North Carolina. So that is kind of how my career has evolved. It has been very, very different in terms of policing in those two jurisdictions, or the three jurisdictions that I've been associated with. As you all know, the city of Richmond, I started my career there in 1989 in the midst of the crack epidemic, a lot of violent crime, a lot of shootings that took place in the city. And there's still too many in the city now, but comparatively speaking, when I first started my career, the city is much safer than when it was. We would consistently see over 100 homicides in the city of Richmond when I was on the street, which was something that I was not accustomed to coming from a small town in North Carolina. And that gave me a lot of experience over the years on how policing changed and how we tackle policing. Because, in Richmond now, they will probably average around 50 to 60 homicides maybe a year. But, in 1994, the city of Richmond had 161 homicides. And so when you look at that compared to where they are now, that's a huge, huge drop. And it's still, that's way too many. 50, 60 is way too many. So there's still too much gunplay. But that was able to give me some insight into, or at least help me out when I went to Harrisonburg, and comparatively speaking. So I get to Harrisonburg, totally different community. I get there, you don't deal with violent crime at all. I was there 2 years. We had one homicide in my 2 years there. And it's interesting because it's all about perspective. The folks in Harrisonburg will say their city is not safe. And they only had one homicide. They averaged about 17 robberies a year. If you have 17 robberies in a week in Richmond, that can occur. Richmond probably averages 13 to 14 robberies a week. And Harrisonburg has 17 in a year, and they think it's dangerous. So it's all about perspective. So getting there, it was a little bit different in terms of what I needed to work on. And basically in Harrisonburg, the difference was just trying to change the mindset of the folks that work there. They had been stuck in like the 1990s in terms of policing, never evolving in terms of thinking about ways to do things better. And that's really what policing is all about. You got to keep up with the times and the changes that are going on within society. And policing has to change with those. And so, community engagement, getting out, talking to folks was extremely important in Harrisonburg, which is something they were not accustomed to doing. Just going from call to call and not really getting out and engaging people and just meeting them on a personal level. I think that's extremely important. So coming from Richmond to there gave me some insight into how to do that because in Richmond, we really try to engage our community as much as we could. And so I enjoyed the Valley. There was no question about it. It was very relaxing. For those that know that part of the state, the mountains are beautiful. I enjoy my evenings sitting out and looking at the mountains and relaxing. But then the opportunity to come back home to Henrico presented itself, and it was something that I could not pass up. And so coming here, I kind of knew the division itself because we worked so closely with them when I was in Richmond. Didn't know a whole lot of the folks that work here in the division, but I had some idea about what Henrico was all about. And I knew the community fairly well because I've been a resident for so long. And so just getting here is just trying to change a little bit of the things that we do here in Henrico, not being so rigid in what we do and allowing people to kind of think a little bit outside the box and allowing officers to have some buy-in to how things are run in the division. As I came in, I told folks, I don't know everything. I might be the chief, but I don't know everything. And so I'm looking, for my officers to have some input into how we run our shop. And there's also, I'm looking for buy-in from community as well. So, I meet with a lot of folks in our community. I have several community groups that I converse with on a regular basis. And I want them to have some input into what we do and how we operate in our division. And so the transparency, communication, and collaboration have been extremely important coming here to Henrico, and I'm just trying to increase that. A lot of what we do in policing is not a secret. I think our community needs to know what we do, and I think that's why you may have noticed if you go on our website about a month ago, we started publishing our data. So you have crime data on there, you have traffic stop data, arrest data, all that is on our website because what we do is not a secret and it doesn't change anything. So we started trying to be a little bit more transparent in what we do. And I think, again, I think that's important. So that was one of the reasons I wanted to come back home. It was just an easy move for me. My house was still here. I never sold it when I moved to Harrisonburg. So I just moved back to my regular house, and it was a very seamless move for me. And then just working for our county manager, he's a blessing to work for as well. A lot of support from not only him but the board of supervisors as well. It's just a great community to work for, and to have an opportunity to come back and make a positive difference in the community that I grew up in, was just rewarding to me. So the adaptation coming back to Henrico has not been difficult at all. It has been interesting, in policing. Over the last 18 months, we dealt with COVID and civil unrest at the same time. And COVID has played a huge role in how we operate, of course. Most of our stuff was virtual. We had to figure out a way when it first hit. We had to figure out a way to make sure that our officers were not going to get, were going to catch the virus, because we were looking at it as if we have an officer that catches it and then they're exposed to a platoon, it wipes out the whole platoon. So how do we have people on the street to answer calls for service? And so we really had to scale back what we did. This is not only in Henrico where I am now, but we had to do the same thing when I was in Harrisonburg. So we basically told folks, I can tell you when I was in Harrisonburg, we basically told our officers, if we don't want you making any traffic stops unless it's something where somebody almost ran over you or did some egregious, just a basic traffic stop because somebody ran a red light, don't make them, because we were trying to limit our exposure to individuals. And then we had to shut down certain services that we were normally providing to our citizens. So when you come in, we stop fingerprinting folks. We shut down our interior of our building, just trying to limit the contact with citizens. And so that made it very difficult because then, you talk about collaboration and meeting community members, and now you're separating yourself from your community members. But those were steps that we had to take because we could not afford to have folks out because we were still essential workers. And so if you don't have people answer calls for service, then we were going to be in trouble. And so those things are still somewhat in play, but we're kind of back to a little bit of normalcy in terms of how we operate now. We are still here in Henrico. We are still not fingerprinting, still trying to limit that to have a certain hours for folks to come in and do that. But we are back to pretty much normal in terms of enforcement. So those were some of the things that COVID kind of dictated to us and how we had to operate. We didn't have any more in-person meetings. We had to shut down our Citizens Police Academy. Some of our normal academies had to take a hiatus, and some of those trainings were done virtually as well. And so it did put a damper on the way we operate, and it still continued to put a damper on the way I operate because I'm in the office more so than anything, doing virtual meetings. And I can tell you that, my personality is I'm going to be out in community. That's who I am. And so I'm not used to looking at people in a box on a screen. So that is how COVID has really impacted us in a negative way. And hopefully we're starting to see some light at the end of the tunnel, and we can get out of this.
So Colonel English, excuse me, that's really interesting to me about the not fingerprinting. Would that have some sort of long-term impact on the type of information that you would hold on people who would normally be fingerprinted? Did you come up with an alternative? I was just thinking, maybe I watched too many crime shows, but I'm thinking, in the future, maybe someone was arrested for something and then they got off because of, some sort of legal process. And then you're trying to connect the dots on a crime later.
Now, let me clarify that. When I was talking about fingerprinting, I wasn't talking about folks that we arrest. So what we have individuals that come to get fingerprinted, citizens that need to get fingerprinted, whether it be for their job, whether it be for something else. I don't know, where they have going to the military, what have you. They have to come and get fingerprinted, and they need that card for employment. And so sometimes it slows down the process for our citizens because they need that. But we were only fingerprinting on certain days and certain times for that to occur. Where normally, if the building is open, you can come in at any time and just walk in and get that done. And so we had to cut that back in terms of that. And so that caused a little bit of lag, I guess, so to speak, from the citizens in terms of maybe employment. So I wasn't talking about arrestees. Arrestees were fingerprint because we were already connected to them anyway. So it didn't matter whether we fingerprinted them or not.
I see. Great. So when you were talking about the various things that you had to change for policing to keep your officers safe and keep the community safe regarding COVID, are those procedures and policies a reflection of the governor's executive order, or are those things that you were able to promulgate within the county?
Right. We created those within the county, but a lot of it was based on the data that we were getting, from the governor and CDC, best practices in terms of how we operated. A lot of it was, we did a lot of teleworking. So we had civilian employees that if they could do their work from home, we would allow them to do that. We acquired a lot of laptops for our civilian employees for them to be able to work from home. And so it was a game changer really for us in terms of how we operated. We had some units that could do their work from home and we allowed them to do that as well, just trying to limit the amount of traffic within the building and contact amongst one another. Roll calls, when you normally see a police show, you have roll calls where everybody's in the same room. Those were done virtually. We'd have people just sit in their car and we'd do it over the computer. Those were just the avenues we had to take to try to limit our exposure to the virus. And again, it still hit every once in a while. You would get an exposure, or you would get somebody that was that was close to somebody that had been exposed. But for the most part, even in Harrisonburg and here, it did not do major damage where it affected service. And that was the thing that we were trying to do. And I can tell you the other part of that too is that, you know, when I was in Harrisonburg, our 911 operators were critical as well. That was one of the things we were trying to make sure that it didn't happen to them as well. Because if you don't have people taking 911 calls, you're going to be in a little bit of trouble. And so all those protocols were put in place to try to limit exposure.
Okay, yeah, that I understand. I didn't actually understand that people went to get fingerprints for other reasons. I would always associate fingerprinting with a negative experience, but that clears that up. So I have another question. So let's say COVID didn't exist. Would you have had, well, yeah, what would be some other things that you would want to accomplish in your first 100 days as the chief of police in a new jurisdiction? I feel like you maybe had to put some of those to the side because of COVID. Was that a very different picture for you?
Well, you know, for me, I'm more in-person conversation. That's what I love to do. So, uh, you know, some of the community meetings that I had to go to were held virtually. Um, we also hold a Citizens Police Academy, which I would have been a part of in terms of face-to-face interaction, which we couldn't do. There were ceremonies that we would host in terms of graduations. We just had an academy graduate in early January where we had to do it virtually. Families couldn't even be a part of the celebration of their loved one going through a police academy for 6 months and be a part of that celebration because that's a great accomplishment. And so a lot of it, just the way it's changed for me is that I'm not able to get out in the community and get out and walk and meet people. You know, normally what we would be doing is we'd be doing community walks in certain neighborhoods where we would go door to door and just knock on folks' doors and just see how they're doing and see how we can best service them. But we're not able to do that right now. But that's something that we're going to be doing once this thing breaks and we feel more comfortable. And so in terms of engagement, it is limited, you know, our interaction with our citizens. And that's the main way it has affected us.
And that I would imagine leads to better relationships, right, between the police and the community.
That is
And
that is definitely the purpose. Just, you know, trying to meet their needs, because a lot of times we go into communities thinking we know what they need until you knock on the door and they tell you something totally different. And so I want to make sure that we are able to listen to those community members so we can kind of address the issues that they have. But not only address the issues they have, but we want to work with them. We want them to be a part of that solution as well.
and that brings to mind the diversity of Henrico. I mean, you go from one end of the county to the other, and the needs are very, very different.
Yes.
And I think I mentioned to you when we met that I was a mentor for a while at Highland Springs High School. And actually, I was partnered with a police officer, and we would go in once, I want to say once a month at first, and then it got to be once a week. So have you, in your time now in Henrico, have you, without being able to go door to door, without being able to do that kind of community interaction, have you thought about some things that would be unique across the county in terms of those types of engagements?
Well, you know, you know, the virtual platform has been used so much now, even in recruitment. You know, we've done so many recruitment platforms, recruitment sessions virtually, and so that has been our, you know, really our go-to. I mean, that's the way we've been able to engage with community members so far. Now, I have had some in-person interactions with communities, but they haven't been large. As you all know, we just had a crazy past weekend in terms of the shooting that took place in the East End. And so I went out and met with that community. I want to say it was Monday or Tuesday evening, and we had an in-person conversation about that situation that occurred. And so there are some situations where I go out and I do meet with community members, but as a whole, most everything has been pretty much virtual. Um, I can tell you that we did some interesting things when I was in Harrisonburg in terms of engagement with our kids. Uh, Kids were out of school in Harrisonburg. We used our robot to reward certain kids, and we would use the robot and take it to by a house where we get a recommendation from a teacher, and we take them lunch, and we'd have the robot go up to the kid's door and present the lunch to the kid, and the kid would able to send the robot back to us. And so just little stuff like that to make you sure you stay engaged with our community and especially our youth, because as you know, when kids are not in school and not kind of cooped up, they get a little antsy, and so we're just trying to make sure we stay engaged with them as best as possible.
Well, that is super cool. Actually, there was a time when I had met with some of your officers. This was a couple of years ago, and they were going to do a demonstration with the robot. I think so. Is it normally used in terms of like bomb threats or things like that?
It is. Yeah, we use it a lot for bomb threats. We do use it a lot to maybe clear a room. There may be somebody dangerous in there, maybe with a weapon, and we can send a robot in there to make sure we get a visual and clear the room. It's used in those situations. And I can tell you that is one of the things that I would like to do eventually when this thing breaks is because there's so much misinformation about how we use our tools. I would like to do a demo day for Henrico about what we have, the tools we have, why we use them, when we use them, because you hear so much about militarization of police departments, and I want to make sure people understand the usage of those things. I always tell people it's not the tools you have, it's how you use them, and as long as you use them in an appropriate manner, people can't complain about that. It's when you use them in a way that's intimidating, it's unnecessary. That's when it becomes problematic.
Yeah, I will definitely sign up for that. That sounds really interesting. When you look at these issues and the way you will respond, it reminds me that we have had a year with a pandemic. We've had Black Lives Matters came out really after the George Floyd shooting. The Me Too movement started actually before that, but it also had some iterations that blossomed, I guess you could say, during 2020. We had a year where if we're not stronger, I don't know, perhaps we're not paying attention, right? A lot to really respond to. What was your experience during the Black Lives protest? Everyone has sort of a different look at it, and I just want to remind everyone that this is not something that actually began in 2020. It began as a hashtag back in 2013. And that hashtag was tweeted 30 million times or 17,000 times a day between 2013 and 2018. However, the death of George Floyd is what brought it to the forefront, and things started changing with regard to that. And that was the pinnacle of the protest. That emotional rawness right in the middle of a pandemic, how do you look at that from a police perspective?
So I was in Harrisonburg when George Floyd took place, when that situation took place. And, just depending on the area you're in, there's a different reaction from community, a different reaction from law enforcement. It just depends on which part of the state you're in. So I was in the Shenandoah Valley when that took place. And I will tell you that there was a lot of emotion in terms of protests. A lot of the nonprofit groups got together. They marched in Harrisonburg. It was all peaceful. We reached out to them. We actually wanted to be a part of the march. They did not want us to be a part of the march, which we were okay with that. We just wanted them to know that they had our support. But I can tell you that we were a part of organizing and making sure they were able to march peacefully. They thanked us after that march. And then one of the groups wanted myself, the Commonwealth Attorney, and the sheriff to come to what they call Court Square and answer questions related to what we do and how we operate. I showed up. There was a lot of anger, a lot of questions that were thrown at us. People wanted me to ensure that we would never use tear gas. They wanted me to get rid of our armored tank that we had. They wanted to make sure that we had our use of force policy in place, all things that people have concerns about. And I stood out there and I answered questions. There's about 500 people there, and I answered every question they had. I wasn't going to shy away from that conversation because it needed to be had. And so once you explain to people why you have certain things, a lot of people don't understand. So when they asked me to get rid of tear gas, I asked them, well, give me another option. How do I move an unruly crowd that may be tearing up Harrisonburg, smashing windows? What do I do? and nobody could give me an answer. And I said, you can't give me an answer, so I have no other tools. So I'm not getting rid of of tear gas. It's just a matter of when you use it. And so we do it. We do have an armored vehicle in Harrisonburg. And one of the things I asked them, I said, when have you seen the armored vehicle? And nobody could answer that question. And the reason being is because it's never been used. Had it for about 4 years, it had never been used because you only need it when stuff goes really, really bad. And so nobody had ever seen an armored vehicle used, but they just wanted to get rid of it just because that was the narrative that was going out. And then I would tell you there was some dissension within the ranks. When you talk about Black Lives Matter, there was dissension within the division of police personnel because, some people saw Black Lives Matter as a terrorist group. Some people saw Black Lives Matter as a group that was fighting for the rights of those that didn't have a voice. And you had officers that thought very differently about that group. And so I had to have some heart-to-heart conversations and roll calls, because at the end of the day, regardless of what your belief is, we all have to work together as police officers and making sure that we support one another. And so there were some difficult conversations that need to be had. And I still, to this day, these are conversations that still need to continue to have within your division.
Yeah, conversations, communications, they also, number one, they dispel some of the myths associated with not just Black Lives Matter, but many issues that have happened over the many years. Yep. And you have to consider the fact that there's always someone, and maybe many someones, who jump on the coattails of others, and they don't even have an interest in the movement. They're just trying to have it benefit themselves. So I applaud you in your approach to that. And we have a question regarding that in our chat. And this question says, the media tends to focus on negative aspects of policing. How do you get a more balanced picture on local or national media?
That is a great question. And I was just in a conversation with some police chiefs in the area on Thursday last week. We were down at Virginia State in a conference. And one of the things we all agree with is that police departments are not good at marketing themselves. That is just not how we're built. And so one of the things I always talk about is that we got to figure out a way to show the size of us that's not always negative, because that's all you hear. And so to give you an example, the Breonna Taylor situation that took place, you heard a lot about that. And so 2 months ago, my SWAT team did a knock and announce search warrant on an individual. And they knocked on the door, announced 3 times, did everything they were supposed to do. When they opened the door, they took 8 rounds that comes through the door. Nobody got hit. Our officers did not return fire. And the reason they didn't return fire because they couldn't tell where the fire was coming from. They just knew it was coming from inside the house. And so those are the stories that you don't hear about. You hear about those firing blindly back into the residence and killing somebody. And we did not fire not 1 round. And we were safely able to negotiate the individual to come out of the house and surrender. And so we don't do a good job of marketing it ourselves, and we got to figure out how to do that because we do need to tell our story, because the only thing, a lot of what you hear, like you said, is the negative aspects of what we do.
Right. And, I was in the media, and not to, throw them under the bus either. However, what bleeds leads. And so it's hard to fight against, a philosophy that really it's a competitive market, right? There's not just one television station or network just in Richmond, never mind across the country. And they're all fighting for those advertising dollars. And so unfortunately, your story does get told for you when you don't have, as you say, a marketing plan. So hopefully that would help that situation. And so we have another question. This is great. Thank you, people. Please keep them coming. A question for you is, are there any regional public safety cooperative initiatives that you are pursuing to not only improve the policing in Henrico, but also throughout the entire region?
Well, I could tell you that of all the localities I've been associated with, the Richmond metro region, we work very closely with one another. We have a great relationship with Richmond, Chesterfield, Hanover, Virginia State Police, our federal partners. we do a lot of collaboration when it comes to policing in this area. And so I think those relationships that we built over the years, uh, think really helps us in terms of, me going to Harrisonburg. I can tell you, we did not work well with one another in Harrisonburg. That's just the reality of it. The sheriff's department and the police department, I won't say the relationship was contentious, but it was nowhere near where it needed to be in order to, provide the best service to the residents there. And so, coming back home here, I think that's a win-win for us in terms of the relationship we have here. And so a lot of the projects that you may see, we work well with one another. There's nothing for Sheriff Irvin in Richmond to call me about a project she's working on, and we will be a part of that, and we will support that project. And so that's the relationships that we have. The sheriff here in Henrico County, Elisa Gregory, is outstanding. Our relationships out here bode well for us in terms of how we service our citizens in the county. And so I would just say that I don't think there's any major project that we're working on collaboratively, but I will say that if there's anything that any of us needs and we need help with, we're only a phone call away, and everybody's always willing to help.
Awesome. We have basically a comment in our chat that says that the perception is that the use of force appears to be inconsistent. Is that part of the issue?
Well, I would say this, and just to be frank, I don't think it's perception. I think the use of force is inconsistent. Just depends on where you are. And I would say the problem is that, I think the perception from the public is that all police agencies operate the same way. And the fact of the matter is, policies and procedures differ depending on the agency that you work for. It was interesting because when I told you about me having to stand in front of Court Square and answer those questions, people were yelling and screaming, like, get rid of those chokeholds. Y'all shouldn't be doing chokeholds. And I'm like, we don't have chokeholds anyway. That's not in our policy. But because it was in policies and other agencies across the country, everybody thought chokeholds were in everybody's policy. And that's not the way we operate. And so there was a huge campaign called 8 Can't Wait. And it was like 8 different things that they wanted police departments to do in order to minimize use of force. And when I looked at it, we were already doing those things. But again, it goes back to marketing. People didn't know, so they only assumed that we were just like everybody else. And so I think that's the big thing, because there is not perception. There are inconsistencies in how use of force is utilized across the country. And I think I would say right now in the state of Virginia, with legislation coming across, I think you'll see some of that changing because there will be some mandates in how training takes place as it pertains to use of force.
Okay, thank you, Colonel. I have another comment for you from Jim Morgan. He says you recently hired a lieutenant colonel in a chief of staff role. Is this a new role in your administration, and what are the responsibilities of that position?
Great question. It is not a new role, but she comes from Chicago, and as you know, coming from Chicago to here, it's probably like, I was talking to her the other day. We had 6 people shot this past weekend in one incident, and we were saying to her, that's probably normal. That's really not normal here in Henrico, but for her, and she's coming from Chicago, it's pretty normal. But I will tell you that she brings a wealth of experience with all the things that she has seen in her police career there. And so she comes here and is now in charge of personnel and recruitment, training, public information, the Public Information Office, and our professional standards unit. So she's not only in charge with making sure we're recruiting well, but she's also in charge of making sure we hold our officers accountable for any wrongdoing and policy violations. And so this is going to be a huge game changer for us, because we've actually revamped our entire disciplinary policies. And so the way we're going to hold folks accountable now compared to the way we used to do it is going to be a dramatic change for our officers, and actually it's going to take some training to make sure they understand what they're going to be facing if they violate various policies within the division.
Thank you. We have a question from Mike Roberson. the term defund the police is different from reforming and improving the training of responders. What are the plans to improve Henrico's training? Perhaps you've addressed part of this.
Well, no, that's a great question, and you're exactly right, because when you reform, uh, one of the things that people are asking for is more training for police officers in certain situations, and there's a cost associated with that. I can tell you that mental health, uh, you're going to see mandates from Department of Criminal Justice Services that is going to mandate more mental health training. They're mandating more implicit bias training for our police officers, and we're actually looking at a different program. While all our officers are trained in crisis intervention, every officer goes through CIT training, crisis intervention training. But we're also looking at a program that we send some officers to. It's called Force. It deals with force science, and it's another program that deals with mental health in terms of how officers respond, taking their time, creating distance, and it's for those situations where you encounter someone with a weapon outside of a firearm. So if you encounter somebody in a crisis that has let's say a baseball bat in their hand, it gives you an opportunity to try to figure out ways to de-escalate that situation without having to use deadly force. And so we're looking at some training for that. Hopefully in the next couple of months, we'll have that finalized, and we'll have officers go through that as well, because we're not getting out of the mental health game. That doesn't seem to be an end in sight for us in that. And so we have to make sure that we're doing all that we can to minimize those the opportunity or the chances of us having to use deadly force in those situations.
Well, you mentioned that you had a conversation and worked with Sheriff Irving. And during my experience with Leadership Metro Richmond, actually, we went and visited I was in the criminal justice reform immersion group, and we went and had a tremendous meeting with Sheriff Irving and her staff. And one of the things she mentioned is that is one of the priorities she was working on, because they are responding to so many situations, and even have people showing up at their gate who really shouldn't be in police custody. They shouldn't be in jail. They should be in a facility that has the tools and the experience and the know-how to be able to help that person from a mental health perspective. So is that part of what's going on?
And as you know, the whole Marcus Alert group has been convening and trying to come up with some solutions in terms of the response. But as you know, there is always going to be a cost associated with that, because again, one of the things you're looking at is ensuring more mental health professionals are involved in the response to that. Now, policing, we're out here 24/7, and so if mental health workers are really going to get involved and be really immersed in this task, they have to be available 24/7. When we get these calls, we can't be waiting for a mental health worker to come from home. It's too late then. So there has to be a way for them to be able to work 24/7, because we never know when we're going to get a mental health call, and they do happen at all times of the day and night. And so there's some work to be done, but I do feel optimistic about it because people are actually looking at it now, and they recognize that it is an issue.
So that's a funding issue for that department then. And wouldn't that be part of your cooperative work across the region if they could get funding?
It is, but I also think it's a state issue as well. I think the state has to provide some funding as well to those entities, because again, localities don't have so much money. And so when you have to increase personnel in order to handle those particular instances, there is a cost associated with that, and they're going to need some help.
Right. And we do have another question from Jim Morgan, and he is asking, what are the biggest challenges you are facing with recruiting new officers? And this actually kind of blends in with one of the questions that we had planned to talk about. And is Henrico's police force at full complement, or are there significant openings to be filled?
Wow, that's a great question. It's something we continue to battle with, and I think it's not just Henrico; it's policing in general across the country. Folks are struggling to bring people into the agency. It used to be in the 1990s, you'd have 1,000 people applying to be an Henrico police officer. We're struggling right now to get 200 applicants when we put it out. That's just the difference that you see in policing. And then, with civil unrest that took place last year, That's made it even more difficult because people are questioning whether they want to get into policing or not. So our efforts, we're having to think outside the box in terms of recruitment. We're trying to target individuals, so to speak. Last 2 weeks ago, we had a I'm sorry, 2 weeks ago, we had a WebEx with Virginia Union students that were criminal justice. They were criminal justice students of Virginia Union. Had a conversation with them about getting into policing. We're going to do the same thing at Virginia State. We're going to do the same thing at VCU, Richmond. We're trying to target those individuals coming out of college that have an interest in policing. And what we try to tell them is that you could be the change that you want to see in policing. You have to be a part of that. Again, it's easy to make those judgments from the sideline, but when you're in the game, you can be a game changer. And so that's the message we're trying to send to those individuals. Because again, somebody like myself, I could easily say, I'm done with this, but I stay in it because I know there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and I know I can help in doing that. But at the same time, I know I need to bring folks into this, into the policing that are going to carry that torch and continue the efforts that need to be made in policing. So it has been difficult, but I think we're doing a decent job, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And right now, we are probably 14 officers short in terms of our complement. Now, again, as I always tell people, we have folks in the academy, and so they go towards our complement, but they're not doing us any good on the street right now. They're going through training, getting trained, and they won't graduate until late July. So we have, I think, 16 officers that are in the academy right now. And see, even though we're down 14, you add those you really add those 16, so you're down 30 officers, because 16 in the academy don't really do you any good right now. So we have to look at it from that perspective. But we have 6 officers lateral. We have 6 lateral officers that are starting at the end of this month. Three officers that came from the Richmond Police Department, one from Petersburg, one from the Capitol Police, and I can't remember where the other one was. But we do offer lateral transfers from other departments, and they just have to go through a modified academy because they've already been certified as officers, and so that helps a lot in terms of time and training.
Right. And, one of the questions that we talked about discussing, and this sort of relates to recruitment, is I wanted to kind of just for a moment talk about the Me Too movement. And, of course, I deal with your officers a lot. I have the pleasure of working with a lot of police officers from Henrico because of all the concerts and our events. And I noticed that there aren't a lot of women who that I get to with whom I get to interface. Is that part of the recruitment issue in terms of getting more women involved?
Yeah, that's always a huge push. Um, it's funny you say that, because I'm currently at the Virginia Association of Chiefs of Police conference, and tomorrow they have a women's summit. Uh, so they have several, and one of my lieutenant colonels is part of that conversation. Lieutenant Colonel Linda Tony is going to be on the panel, and what they're trying to do is just get folks to understand that women have a place in this business. As you all know, policing is male dominated, has been for many years. But I'm gonna tell you, women play a huge role in what we do in this profession, and we have to be very intentional about how we go about trying to bring more women into a male dominated profession. Uh, they bring a valuable resource to this job, and that has been a problem for us, and that is one of the things we're looking at in terms of our intentional recruitment.
And training, correct? To provide the maybe a different perspective to women who would want to get involved. I mean, you have to see that the Me Too movement came out of a lot of perceptions that have to do with women not feeling comfortable in
Right.
certain roles and in certain environments. And so here again, if you can get the word out in terms of the changes that you're making, and they've been made across the country, but part of what I read online is that a lot of women still feel like it was just a hashtag, it was just a thing with the women's march, and now everyone's forgotten. So it just needs to be maybe brought to the forefront. And Jonathan Hewitson suggested maybe using social media.
Right, and I would agree with that, especially in terms of volume. getting that message out volume wise. Social media is always a good platform to do that. And then once folks come into the agency, as you know, we train them, but we have a lot. We have, I want to say it's two females and the female captain are oversee our training division. And so I think that always helps coming in to a male dominated profession. You have to see somebody that you feel comfortable with when you're going through that training. Could you imagine, being a female and was all male instructors? Uh, I don't know if I would feel comfortable as a woman going through that. And so I think it's always important to make sure because we want them to get through the academy. We don't want them to fail. But if you can make it easier, which I think it does when you have females that have been through exactly what these women are going to go through the academy and be able to instruct those individuals as well, I think it makes it a lot easier for them to progress.
Yeah, agreed. We have another question in the chat, and this comes from Al Hinkle. He mentioned his vision, meaning you, Colonel English. You mentioned your vision for the department. When you achieve it, what would it look like from the inside and outside of the department?
What it will look like is that every member of the division will be what we consider a community officer. So we have a community unit that's tasked with going out and meeting community groups, scheduling events, having those conversations. But for me, my vision is that every officer should be a community officer. Every officer should know the folks in their community. Every officer should know people by name. When you're getting out and having conversations, not just when people in their time of crisis, but just in everyday travels. Miss Jones out planting flowers. Why not get out and talk to her? That's what I envision, because then it makes life a lot easier when community members know who the officers are and officers know who the community members are. It's one of my mentors always told me it's difficult to treat somebody wrong when you know them, and so you got to be able to get to know individuals because then their service is going to be so much better. And that's what I envision for our folks, because again, a lot of times we sit behind our cars, we drive through neighborhoods, we don't roll our windows down, and we just stay so engaged in our computers and our laptops that we don't get out and have those casual conversations. And I think if we break down those barriers and we continue to collaborate with one another, it's going to make solving problems in our communities so much better because we're going to be working together.
Sounds awesome. I'm from a small town too, Eric. So that sounds like more like a comfortable atmosphere. Mike Roberson is asking you roughly how many officers are scheduled to retire prior to graduation of the current trainees.
Oh, that's a great question. So this is something that we are looking at as well. Right now, when you talk about eligible to retire, we probably have about 35 officers that are eligible to retire, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to retire. And so sometimes it's difficult for us to engage, or at least try to strategize on how many people are going to be leaving, so we can kind of manage that. Some folks are eligible to retire. They can come in one day and say, "Look, I've had enough." But I can tell you that, the county manager, board of supervisors, just gave county employees a huge raise, and I can tell you that I've had quite a few folks that were going to retire came to me and said, "Chief, I'm gonna be around a little bit longer." So that has helped. I will say that has helped. It definitely has helped. But I do think I do know of right now. I do know we're gonna have at least 3 people that are probably going to retire in May in our division. They're just made up their mind that it was time for them to go. And I don't fault them at all. But we probably have about 35 people right now that are eligible to leave at any point.
Well, as we continue our discussion, one of the things that we had planned to talk about is technology. So I'd like to turn to that. In fact, next month, Eric, we're going to have David Erie, I mentioned this, from the Center for Innovative Technology, and he's talking a lot about smart cities, and a lot of that affects the way police work and emergency services are able to respond to the community. And I wanted to start with body cams. What is your experience with them? Unfortunately, there's so many police shows and they show a particular perspective on this, but I don't really regard it as being accurate necessarily. Do you see it as an advantage?
I do. I see it as an advantage for both the officers and the citizens. And I will say the majority of the body worn cameras that I see they have really saved us in terms of how people see things. Now, do we mess up? There's no doubt we mess up. There are sometimes I watch body worn camera and I'm shaking my head like I can't believe our officer did that. Uh, so it helps both ways, because when we're trying to hold our officers accountable, that body worn camera says a lot in terms of our investigation into that. But I will also say that we get a lot. We get I won't say a lot, but we get complaints from citizens about how our officers interacted with them. And when you look at the body worn camera, it tells a totally different picture than what the citizen complained about. And so I will say overwhelmingly, it exposes and it saves our officers in many instances, more so than it catches them doing something wrong. So I am a huge proponent for body worn cameras, and I'll be honest with you, I think every agency needs them. Uh, I just really do. Um, so I've had bias complaints from citizens, that would accuse officers of stopping them because of the color of their skin. And when you look at the body worn camera video, I've seen video where officers were the most polite and cordial individuals in that situation. And I'm trying to figure out how did they get to a race issue in that one. So it saves us a lot of times. And, again, I think it's a lot of it has to do with policy and how your policy is implemented when in wearing body worn cameras, when you turn them off, when you turn them on. Those things are important. But overwhelmingly, I am a huge proponent of body worn cameras.
Okay, and that there's that technology, and there's a tremendous um, body of technology that is being worked on across the state. And one of the things that was brought up is with smart cities is to be able to analyze an intersection and know before the accident happens by looking at patterns. So this would be technology with cameras that watch near misses. And then this technology would be able to accumulate that data and send it to your department, send it to you, so that changes can be made. Maybe instead of, in other words, a lot of times it seems to a traffic light is put in place because of a number of accidents. And this technology is created to sort of predict an accident based on near misses. Does that sound like something that would be useful to you?
Oh, no doubt. Because right now, the way we, um, I guess the way we analyze those things that you talk about is we look at how many crashes we've had. And so they've already occurred. And so it would be great to be able to analyze near misses, because again, that's more of a preventive measure than looking at it after the fact. Now, again, that's an important aspect for us, because uh, there's two calls I get most complaints about in the county of Henrico, which really surprised me when I got here. Uh, they either have to do with traffic related calls, whether it be speeding, accidents, or I get calls about animals. Those are the two most complaints I get from citizens in Henrico, which is really shocking to me, coming from the city of Richmond, where people are complaining about shootings and robberies and whatnot. But traffic is extremely important, and I can tell you that one of the things that we are looking at is trying to figure out how do we minimize the number of traffic crashes, especially in our problematic intersections in the county. And so that is something that we're going to be looking at, and that technology that you're talking about would be very beneficial in trying to analyze that.
Yeah, and driving around, and this is anecdotal, but I have noticed a few more cars on the road, and people are making some interesting decisions on the road. So, I'm wondering, post-COVID, we haven't been driving. The cars have been sitting in the driveway, and maybe people forgot how to drive. Are you concerned about the uptick in traffic and the downgrade on related skills?
Well, it's not just that. As you said, when COVID hit, there wasn't not a lot of traffic on the road, but those that were on the road, I can tell you that those that were traveling during that time frame felt like the road was theirs, and theirs only because there was nobody out there. And so now what we're seeing is that now that traffic has picked up, some of those still feel like the road is theirs. I can't tell you over the last couple of weeks how many times we've seen somebody going 120 miles an hour down 295. I'm telling you, it is crazy that we're clocking people doing that type of speed. Uh, and so a lot of folks are just, I don't know, they feel emboldened. We don't know what the answer is, but we are seeing a lot of more traffic related incidents taking place. And I can tell you that hands-free, the hands-free law that went into effect, I can just tell you that was just words. People have not taken that seriously enough, because you pull up at any intersection, I can guarantee you can go out there right now and pull up any intersection, somebody has their phone in their hand doing something. And so that is just something we got to tackle a little bit more to get that message out, because the inattentiveness of drivers is causing a lot of these crashes that we're seeing in the county.
And that's always been the case, right? I remember when I was doing traffic with NBC 12, I actually interviewed a state trooper at the corner of Parham Road and West Broad. There used to be a little Rennie's gas station or something. I don't know if it's still there. And the conversation we were having was about people, I think you call them red light runners or red runners or something. I don't know, maybe I made that up in my head. But anyway, we were talking about people who run red lights. And we had the conversation. It was at the end of the 5 a.m. show. So it was a couple minutes before 7. He went away. I got in the truck for the break before we do our cut in. And literally within 5 minutes, a guy went through the intersection, a woman ran a red light. She hit him in the rear quarter panel. And I watched that truck roll down Parham Road right in front of me. I happened to be very pregnant at the time. I started hyperventilating, but it was just crazy that we just had that conversation. And during that interview, he said that the majority of accidents happen because of this inattention, which is not just on your phone, which has probably gotten
Right.
a lot worse since then, but also, changing your radio station, smoking a cigarette, eating an entire dinner at the steering wheel.
Yep. All those things are factors in accidents that are occurring in our county. And we just got to get the message out to folks, because a lot of these things are preventive. And we're seeing a lot of damage, injuries, unnecessarily, just because of people not paying attention while they're driving.
Right. And so we have another question in chat. Are there plans for increased traffic enforcement post COVID-19 relating to our conversation here?
Well, I can tell you, we get a lot of calls from communities about traffic in their specific areas. We take all of those serious, but I can tell you that I have to find a balance from my seat, because I get a lot of complaints about traffic enforcement, and I will get community members in the same community that will say, "Chief, you need to enforce traffic more in our area," and then those same community members, not the same community members, but members in that same community, will also say, "Chief, you're stopping too many people in this community on traffic stops." And so now I got to find out, okay, have to the members feel one way and have to feel the other way. I got to figure out the balance. And I will tell you, I am not a numbers guy when it comes to traffic enforcement. Anybody can go out here and write a bunch of speeding tickets. That's easy to do, and it's never going to solve the speeding issue. I'm more focused on how can we stop people from getting injured in these problematic intersections and accidents that we're having. I would rather us focus on that than anything else, because I'm never going to stop speeders. And there's other ways we can kind of address that in some of our communities, whether it be speed humps, roundabouts, what have you. There's other ways to look at those things. But I wouldn't say there's going to be any more enforcement. We're going to address the issues that come before us. And I would say that we are heavy enforcement in traffic already. So I don't know how much more we can do in terms of that.
Okay, thank you. Well, we're coming up on 2:00, but before you go, I'm going to have a selfish moment, because, we're trying to do our events in Innsbrook, but there's a lot of people on this call actually who are in the event business or do events that have to do with their charity and building their charities. From that perspective, do you see crowd control being like looking different post-COVID? And what I mean by that is, our first concert we're planning to have with some restrictions. Maybe that'll get better, but do you see police officers enforcing mask wearing at events? Do you foresee any problems with events that would be different than before COVID?
Well, I can tell you, Yvonne, I hope not in terms of us having to engage that piece of it. I think we wear so many hats now that, us enforcing mask wearing would be problematic for us. I would rather do the information. I'd rather give out that information and make sure, try to gain compliance that way. Um, because I just think it smacks in the face of when you're trying to build relationships with your citizens. And now we got to go in and tell you, put your mask on. And I just think it caused a lot of dissension between police and community, even though that may be the law and it may be the order that's given. I do think you will see a little bit of difference in terms of that because there are certain restrictions in those venues. And so how those venues operate, I think will look a little bit differently. But I also think those that are attending those venues know that, and they know there's going to be restrictions. And I think people are just going to be so happy to get out that they just want to have a good time too. And I'm one of those people. I can't wait to get out to have a good time. But I tell you, it's been hard on me, so I know it's been hard on our citizens. But I really am looking forward to all of you all that have events and events coming up to be able to manage those and do them safely as well, because I think it's going to make everybody a lot happier.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think people will be willing to cooperate just so we can get out and be among each other and be able to have some good times. And I don't want to abuse your time or anyone else's on this call. So we've come to the end of our discussion, but I do want to say thank you so much for coming and spending an hour with us. Yes, a lot of applause around. What an amazing discussion. And I want you to know, I've been talking to some of the officers, as we prepare for our events, and you get a lot of kudos from your officers. And that speaks volumes, in terms of what you're doing in the county. So I just want to thank you for coming. I also want to just say thank you to your officers in general and you for putting yourselves in harm's way so that we can be safe. And there's always going to be people who have different judgments. And, like you say, everybody makes mistakes, but at the same time, I'm not willing to do it. And so thank you for being willing to do it and for taking such a tremendous leadership in what you're doing.
Well, I certainly appreciate the opportunity here. And I tell you, you all as citizens and y'all play a major role into what we do. Again, I always tell people, hold us accountable because you should. And I think it's important for, like I said, to make sure we're engaging with you all. And these conversations are always helpful to be able to hear and listen to what you all have to say. And I always tell people I never turn down a conversation. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak before you.
Well, thank you so much. And we appreciate you taking the time. And anytime you need an opportunity, a platform for a town hall or a conversation, I'll fire up my computer and give you the mic. It was really a pleasure to talk with you today. And thank you everyone for being here. We just love having folks join us. And as I mentioned, we do have David Erie coming next month, and he'll be here on April 15th. So look for that event, and we will be sending out an email, and also it will be on our website as well, and that'll be April 15th. And yes, we do have the crazy thought of having two events on one day. So that evening will be Innsbrook's Women of Worth, and we'll be sending information out about that. As Colonel English mentioned, his door is always open, and mine as well. If you have a speaker or a subject that you want us to cover, we would absolutely love to hear from you. And we're going to start partnering with charities as well. So if you have a charity in mind, speaking of which, Henrico, remind me again, Colonel English, it's Henrico PAL. That's your charity of choice. The way we say thank you to our speakers is that we send a donation to a charity of their choice after every table talks. And we have been keeping that going even in the midst of the pandemic. So we'll be sending a small gift to Henrico PAL, and we'll of course do that on behalf of Colonel English. So thank you again, and thank you everyone for joining us. Please stay safe and stay engaged, and really appreciate you coming. You just lift my spirits. Thank you.